Good afternoon, OACP members. As we reach the midpoint of the 2021 legislative session, I wanted to give you an update regarding a number of bills we have been working on over the last several months that are finally coming to a head as what we call our first chamber deadline nears. So tomorrow, Tuesday, by the end of the day, all bills in committees that are subject to deadlines have to be moved out of the committee and onto their way to the floor or to another committee, or they're dead for the session. As you know, we've been able to successfully kill a number of very problematic measures, and we're hoping that we will have additional damaging measures that we can kill by the deadline tomorrow night. The bills I'd like to update you on are bills that represent our efforts to negotiate a bill that's damaging into something that we can live with or even feel good about. So last week, the House Judiciary Committee in one work session dealt with 10 separate bills. And I'm pleased to say for each one of those bills, the committee adopted our amendment to the bill. And there were competing amendments for a number of those bills. And I wanted to give you a brief update on those. I also wanted to mention that in the update that I'm sending you, you're going to get written information so you can have a little more detail about these bills, links to the actual amendments that were adopted so you can look at the provisions themselves and other additional information. What I don't include in this update, I'm not including any Senate bills. I'll tell you that in terms of police reform, there were very few bills on the Senate side that deal with police reform. I didn't deal with those. I'm also not updating you on some of the other public safety bills that are floating around there, including sentencing and some other issues. I really focused on police reform. I'd like to talk now about the 10 bills that were passed. I'm going to focus just on a few of them so you can see kind of where we ended up. Many of these are going to be familiar to you because I've mentioned them in previous updates, but hopefully you'll get an idea of where we are now and you'll feel a lot better about where things stand. The first bill I want to mention is House Bill 2928. That's the tear gas and munitions bill. There were competing amendments. They did end up adopting our -3 amendment instead of a -2 amendment that was not better than the original bill by very much. The bad amendment, the -2, would have continued to basically take tear gas off of the table completely. It also would have taken away our liability protection when we respond to a riot or mob action. We've interpreted that liability protection, if it's gone, to mean that we could be liable for responding to a riot or for not responding to a riot. So that was a very problematic amendment. It was close, but in the end, they adopted our -3. Again, it does increase the restrictions around tear gas, but it's still that can be used in crowd control. And in addition, it keeps our liability protection in place. So I'm very pleased about that. The second bill I want to mention is House Bill 2932. That's the use of force reporting bill. And as you know, in its original form, it would have required agencies to report all use of force and threatened use of force, including the officer's name and information. And so obviously that's problematic. The amendments they were considering to the bill in committee last week would have still required a whole new database, a duplicate database to the FBI National with additional entries in terms of data. And we obviously were concerned about that. And it also, again, would have connected the officer's name to that use of force. So we were fortunate in that the committee chose to adopt our -6 amendment. It requires police agencies in Oregon to enroll and participate in the FBI National Use of Force database. And I'm pleased to say that the vast majority of Oregon agencies are already doing that. In fact, over 90% of all officers in Oregon are covered by agencies who are enrolled and participating. So that's a very good result from our perspective. The third is House Bill 3059. That's a bill that started as a bill to eliminate or repeal the unlawful assembly law altogether. It would have taken away a tool we currently use in crowd management and left us with very little to work with. So you can see when you combine this effort to eliminate the use of tear gas and you combine that with eliminating our ability to declare an unlawful assembly, there's problems there. Fortunately, the committee adopted our -1 amendment, and that just updates antiquated language in statute right now that says that if we do declare an unlawful assembly, we shall go into the crowd and we shall arrest. Well, there's a lot of times where going into the crowd is not safe, and we're not going to do that. And we don't want to arrest everybody necessarily. So we changed the shalls to may. We think that's a very good result. The next bill I want to mention is House Bill 3145. That's the misconduct database bill. Would have required your agency to send over every complaint, every allegation at every level of discipline in your agency for every officer, regardless of whether it's been investigated or not. Of course, that's a very problematic bill. It would have involved an incredible amount of time just to share that information. It would have exposed officers publicly for things that may just require mentoring or correction. It was just a bad bill. Thankfully, they adopted our -4 amendment. The -4 amendment basically says that we will send over to DPSST to add to their decertification database currently those types of misconduct that result in sustained economic discipline, those that are sustained after going through the whole arbitration process. So it's the significant levels of discipline, a day off without pay, demotion. Those are the kind of things that when you're using that kind of discipline in your agency, they're significant, there's far fewer of them, and we feel a little more comfortable about those kind of disciplinary actions being public. We certainly didn't want any more than that to be included. Another bill I want to mention, House Bill 3355, is the famous uniform bill. It's a bill that began, if you remember, requiring every agency to have a uniform with officers wearing a white or blue shirt and blue slacks. A terrible, dumb bill, but we knew there was going to be some things done on uniforms. They adopted our -2 amendment. It's significant because it limits the application or the uniform impacts to crowd management. We actually add a definition of crowd management to ensure it did not include parades and other gatherings. It only involves officers who are assigned specifically to a crowd management function. It then requires certain things in terms of the uniform. Requires first initial and last name on both the front and back of the uniform, or a DPSST number or other identifying number. And then it requires the patch identification of the agency, and then whether it's a police, sheriff, or trooper on the uniform as well. But that only applies to jurisdictions over 150,000 population. For agencies that may or may not ever see these kind of events, we didn't want to apply to all of your agencies. There were a few additional bills that are in play. House Bill 2162 is the one that had a number of provisions, but it required all agencies in Oregon to be accredited. That will be limited to only agencies with 35 or more sworn police officers. I know that is a significant impact for some agencies. That's one where we did our best to limit the impact. That's as high as we could get it. They were looking at much lower numbers, and we believe that it's going to be difficult for smaller agencies to seek accreditation unless their local government makes a decision to do that. House Bill 2929, that's the duty to intervene bill. It was actually an awful bill to begin with. We actually were able to get them to adopt our -3 amendment, which actually clarifies where an officer has to report when they see misconduct of another officer. And more importantly, it takes away the duty to intervene for those things that represent violations of fitness. Those are harder to measure. In some cases, it's impossible to know how to intervene. So for those kinds of misconduct, we're only requiring those officers to report that information, not to intervene. 2930, House Bill 2930 is the arbitration bill. I think it's a very strong bill. I'll go into more detail about that bill in a separate update, but very positive results for that as they adopted the -15 amendment. And then finally, House Bill 2936, they adopted our -4 amendment, another terrible bill to begin with that required DPSST to do all background checks, had a number of other problematic provisions. As it was amended, it now provides us with new hiring tools including the ability to utilize or look at social media to do that shoulder surfing that was taken away a few years ago, to be able to share personnel records and to have liability protection, and to gain background information from private employers. And then the private employers also get liability protection for sharing that information. So as you can tell, there is a lot going on. You'll see additional detail in my report. I'm going to try to provide additional information in the days ahead. But I want to thank everybody that has helped make this possible. It's been a team effort. I want to thank everybody that's been part of our strategic review and response team. Incredible number of folks that have testified in committees. And all I can say is we still have a few really bad bills floating around. Two in particular. House Bill 2204, that's the bill that would basically increase tort claim limits on all local governments for the acts or omissions of a police officer. The estimate from League of Oregon Cities and Associated Oregon Counties is that that would be an $18 million cost, the fiscal impact on local governments. Terrible bill. It may end up getting sent from the House Judiciary Committee to the House Rules Committee. The reason that's problematic is the Rules Committee is not subject to deadlines, and the bill ends up living for the whole session. Now, that being said, I believe we have generated enough no votes on that bill that we don't believe it's likely to move. But as long as it's alive, it can be amended, changed, and so we have to keep our eye on it. The last one I want to mention that's still alive that's problematic, and there are others, but these are really problematic, is House Bill 2002. It's the Partnership for Safety and Justice Omnibus Police Reform Bill. It includes all kinds of terrible provisions. It is likely to go to the Rules Committee as well. I also feel fairly confident that we will be able to kill that bill at some point in the process, but it's frustrating to me that it's going to Rules where it will continue to live. We are still, even at this point, trying to stop that from happening. As you know, as I've mentioned, it'll be tomorrow night, that deadline where we'll know if we've been successful, but I'm just going to guess that we're going to have at least one of those two bills in the Rules Committee. And as a result, we're going to have to sleep with one eye open for the time being and into the rest of the session. So thank you all for your support. I know that there are impacts this session, but as I think about what we were looking at in terms of just the vast number of bills, the problematic bills, the damaging bills, I feel very good about where we're at right now. And I will encourage you, if you have any questions about any bills that I haven't mentioned, please reach out to me. We've killed a lot of bills, as I've mentioned. We've killed the right to rest bill. We've killed other bills that are really problematic, but there are still more to go. So with that, thank you again for your support. And I'll look forward to updating you all again soon. Don't hesitate to reach out. It's a privilege to serve all of you.